Show featuring Lenny. The only NFL podcast where one of the hosts thinks analytics sounds like something he has to get a shot for when he spends too much time outside. That's Lenny. He's here. He's on my left. I am really pumped today because it's kind of the off season, which means it is the off season, which means I can do whatever I want. And what I wanted to do today was bring on a really interesting person that I met recently. If I didn't give it away in my intro there, he works in analytics for the Baltimore Ravens, team that I'm sure you guys know is very analytically inclined is how I usually describe them. His name is Corey Krawiec. And Corey, your title is Manager of Player Evaluation and Analytics. Did I get that right?
Yep, you nailed it.
Is that on your business card? It's so long. How long has it been that title?
It did, yeah. 3 years. I wanted something that made it sound like I was a lot smarter than I really am. I felt like the longer I made it, the better that would go. So.
The difficult thing with analytics and various NFL teams is you guys all have different job names, like for doing the same things. Like every team calls it something different. So it's really hard to tell who does what and who is important.
Yeah, I think that's kind of why, right? It's research, it's strategy, analysis, analytics.
Yeah.
The more confusing you can make it, the better.
Well, manager can mean a lot of things. Like, do you actually manage people?
We do have a team now, yeah. So for a couple of years I wasn't, but now I actually am. So it's more applicable now.
Yeah, I've been wanting to have someone like you on the show for a long time because for those who listen to this podcast, I am not someone who does any math on her own in any capacity other than mostly just reading the math that other people do and trusting it and thinking it's valuable. And I feel like analytics in general in the NFL gets pigeonholed, mischaracterized, misrepresented. There's straw men all over the place. So I'm hoping that we can eliminate some of those, talk to you a little bit about what you actually do and what your views are on football and how we talk about football and all of that fun stuff. But first I want to start by just kind of explaining to people who you are. So I guess like to start with a really dumb, obvious question. How did you get your job?
Yeah. So, I always knew that it was going to be tough to get into sports, like from the start, right? It's super competitive. So really early on, I got a job ushering at Wrigley Field for the Cubs.
That's how you do it.
Exactly, right? From the ground up. And my responsibility was actually to stand outside of the exit door of the bathrooms to make sure people didn't sneak in there and actually went in the entrance. So, you talk about working your way from the bottom up. I don't know how much more bottom you can get than that. But it was great because it really gave me an appreciation for like the buzz around the stadium on game day and just how much fun it is to be around it, right? So went back to college and had that in mind. And I studied information systems and threw in sports management there so that I could have sports on the resume. And then first job out of school, I was super lucky. I got hired by the Chicago Blackhawks as a hockey operations intern. And the goal there was to kind of or what I thought I was going to be doing was like Moneyball in hockey, right? That was the really, really early days when the advanced metrics were starting to come to that sport. My main responsibilities were a lot of like manual data entry, getting ice time and different things from reports. And if there were 15 games in a day, like that would be 8 hours of work, just typing all that stuff in. So it really that's what inspired me to learn how to code. Like if you can do all that stuff in 2 minutes rather than 8 hours, you can explore a lot more. So that's kind of where I really got a passion for doing more in-depth coding and analysis.
I'm going to pause you before you get to your next step because I have two big questions. One, did you ever actually have to stop someone from trying to get into the bathroom on the wrong side?
Oh, all the time.
Really?
All the time. Yeah.
And like you had to throw hands?
Yeah. Oh, no. I mean, I weighed like 130 pounds. It wasn't a very good role to put me in. Like if somebody came at me and really wanted to get in that way, they were getting in.
You know who women do that so often, like at the sporting events. Like women have no shame. I feel like women are the biggest rule breakers of all when it comes to breaking into the bathroom and not wanting to wait in line. And sports, well, the lines for sports games are pretty. I would say like if you really want to like take advantage of being a woman at like an analytics conference, there's no line, right, for the bathroom. But at a sports game, you will have to wait in line. My second question was in hockey in 2009, 2010, when you first started out, like what was even the availability of data like? Because we're going to talk a lot about NFL and sort of the increased availability of data, both to people in teams and outside of teams. But I imagine back then for hockey, it was not as advanced as it is now.
No, definitely not. I mean, that was back to where you had the HTML game reports that the league would put out every day, right? So they were just PDFs and files online where you'd have to like actually manually look at it and then enter it into an Excel spreadsheet.
It's glamorous. So how did you get from there to football?
Well, after that ended, went to grad school, and then this is going to fulfill every analytics stereotype here, but I spent a year living in my parents' basement trying to get hired by a sports team. Got offered a job by an MLB team, and then turned it down because I had an opportunity to interview at the NFL office. And then I didn't get that job either. So I was kind of back to square one. And then the Ravens posted an analytics internship, and I had a phone interview for it on a Monday. And when they were interviewing me for it, they asked if I had a place to stay in Baltimore. And I was like, yeah. Which was technically true because I figured I could just get a hotel room, but I didn't want that to cost me the opportunity. And so they called me back that Wednesday, told me I was hired. I had to start that following Monday. So I had to pack up and move from Chicago to Baltimore in the course of 3 days. And then 3 months later, here we are.
What year was that?
That was 2013, the year after the Ravens won the last Super Bowl, which everybody makes sure to remind me we haven't won since I've been here.
It seems pretty cause and effect. So you've been with the Ravens now for 7 years, which is, I imagine, like a pretty long time, because this is still a pretty nascent space in football, right? And one that's expanding rapidly. And most people on team, I mean, there are people who have been working for the same teams for about as long as you have, but it's not a large group. What were you doing when you first started there?
Basic stuff, more advanced than what I was doing with the Blackhawks, but it was kind of like starting to help out Sandy, who was there, the director who was there at the time, and building some models and doing a lot of kind of like text analysis, looking for key phrases, things like that. It was kind of just like a jack of all trades, right? Be there to help with anything coaching or scouting related.
But there's tremendous variance, again, not just in the titles, as I mentioned earlier, amongst NFL teams, but like the size of the teams and how much they're listened to, quite frankly. I think that's partially why Daniel Stern, who I believe graduated from Yale like a year ago. It's something really upsetting. When I found out, I was deeply upset by it. But it is why he became a national celebrity, because I think it was our friend Sheil Kapadia at The Athletic, maybe, who wrote about him, right? But there was a piece about just how his role in helping Coach Harbaugh with fourth down decisions, which isn't, it's not a terribly dramatic thing, but just the fact that you guys were going in for so much that I think it was really the way Coach Harbaugh talked about it, where it was obvious that he had really bought into it and that the organization had bought into, this sort of numeric thinking that sort of made people kind of latch onto the Ravens as being, oh, you're an analytically inclined. I'm going to keep using that phrase. But you're like the nerd team, basically, last year.
Yeah. I think that kind of comes like to the victor go the spoils, right? We didn't win the ultimate prize, but like, I think people are always really interested in what's kind of working in the league right now, right?
And we will get to that. Well, tell me what you do now. Like, so your title is Manager of Player Evaluation and Analytics. What are all the things your job entails?
Yeah, I think so. I'm the lead analyst on the scouting side, working with pro scouting, college scouting, salary cap departments. And in the end, it's just trying to, help us minimize our biases, use evidence to aid in our decision making. Ultimately we're trying to predict the future, right? And that's a really, really hard thing to do in general, especially when we're talking about a game with 11 players on one side against 11 players on the other side and an oddly shaped ball that can bounce in like any direction. So, it's just, in the end, we're just trying to use information to explore and investigate and see how we can kind of aid ourselves when we're making decisions.
Mm-hmm. And those decisions pertain to?
We talked about me being here for 6 years, but the Ravens have been really successful and doing a lot of really smart stuff for a long time. Like, it would have been really easy for Coach and Eric and Ozzy and everyone to be like, no, we're good. Like, we're doing fine. So I think it says a lot about them that they are open to this kind of stuff and investigating and exploring new things despite being, really successful.
Before we get to sort of your experience, I suppose, and some of the things happening in football, the trends, I kind of want to talk to you about the misconceptions I alluded to earlier. People who follow me on Twitter know that I complain a lot about one of my least favorite things is when you're watching a football game and the announcer just uses like the word analytics as the subject. Like, the analytics told him to go for 2, or the analytics said, to do, I guess, go for it on 4th down at the 45-yard line without just simply explaining why. Like, okay, well, if they go for 2 here, then they can win it down the road and they have that information or something, what seems to me to be plausible. And I guess I want to start by asking you, kind of, as somebody who works in the space, what frustrates you, whether it's watching a game or sort of when you hear people talk about analytics and sort of how it informs or doesn't inform decision-making or roster construction or whatever. What are some of the phrases or the ways in which it's discussed that you feel like it's time to end?
I mean, even just the word analytics, right? I think when you say that, it implies that there's like this mystical, unknowable quality about what goes into the analysis, right? Like, the analytics say to go for 4th downs, but like, really, if you boil it down, it's really just kind of a simple math. This is greater than the other, right? Like, it's not that complicated. I mean, it can be if you get really deep into models and what teams are doing, but at its base level, it's really not. And so that's, one thing that there's so much public research out there on 4th downs and 2-pointers. Like, seems like it'd be pretty straightforward to kind of have at least, basic understanding of why teams are doing what they're doing, that kind of thing.
Do you feel like there's a misperception of like what your job actually entails, or maybe the things that you're prioritizing?
Maybe. I think what more comes out with that is that there's a lot of the nuances lost. Like, teams are either bought in or they're not. And like, every move they make is a referendum on this team is bought in or this team's not bought in. And, a lot of this is nuance and how much you're letting it impact your decisions and that kind of thing.
I was just talking to someone about that because in this latest draft, the Ravens took a running back in the second round. The Chiefs took a running back at the end of the first round. Very different things, very different meanings. And I think with the Chiefs, there was a feeling, well, they passed it the most on early downs last year. We were kind of joking on Twitter, this is our team now. They're the nerd team. This was a victory for the nerds. But, oh no, they took a running back in the first round. And the Ravens are the analytics team. But, whoa, they took a running back in the second round. Does this mean that they're actually not what we perceive them to be, if that makes sense?
There's so much really good, really excellent research that a lot of smart people have done about things like positional value and roster construction and all this stuff. But I think whenever you're adhering to very rigid, like dogmatic rules of like, never do this, never do that, it kind of gets you in trouble. And that's almost a little head in the sand too. Yeah. I think that ultimately we're just trying to, you have resources that you can use, whether it's draft picks, cap space, all that kind of stuff. And you're just trying to best use everything at your disposal to improve your chances of winning, right? Like, they're not going to give out an award at the end of the season for the team that most efficiently allocated all their resources.
I kind of just want to talk more generally on how views of running the football have evolved since even 2013 when you came into the NFL.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one thing that a lot of people know at MC now is the effect that running has or doesn't actually have on play action success, right? That's one thing that, tons of work has been done on what really makes play action successful. And is it running or just the threat of it? So you have that. And I don't know, it's a weird one for me to answer, right? Like, in some ways running the football is fun. And how do you talk to players who grow up wanting to run the football and wanting to impose their will, right?
Right.
As much as us analysts can say, you should pass more and you shouldn't run more. Like, if linemen actually like passing or like running more, like, I think there is some psychological effect to what they believe in too, right?
Totally. I think that there's one thing that I've always felt is kind of lost in the running discussion, is if you talk to an offensive lineman, you start seeing it a little bit differently. You know what I mean? Like understanding the effect it has. I mean, it's a rest. God, it really does. And then you look at the numbers and you say, well, this isn't borne out by efficiency and then what we're seeing and down to down, but it actually affects their ability to play football on a series to series basis.
Yeah, right. It's like, we've seen plenty of studies about body blows and whether that's real or not, and the actual effect of it on success rate and points added and rushing yards and all that. And, that evidence really doesn't point to much, but, in the end, it's still guys playing a game, right? Yeah.
Well, and of course with the Ravens or the Niners, for example, who I should have mentioned as an example, again, like late, in the playoffs, like running the football is good when you are good at running the football.
Right. That's right. We're trying to win, right? If you're really good and can run the ball effectively, like you should do that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. You hate running the football. What else? What do other people yell at you about when it comes to your job?
Yell at me. I don't know if it's that. I mean, there's plenty of stuff like that I see on broadcast that, how many times you'll see, like when a team runs X number of times a game, they win 80% of the time. When a team passes a bunch of times like that's, I think we're getting past that a little bit, but you'll still hear it. And, my counter to that is always, do you know what the Ravens record is since 2006 when they kneel the ball 3 times in a game? It's 30-0.
It's amazing. Wow, you guys should kneel every time.
Yeah, right. So we should just kneeling. Exactly. Just take the opening kickoff, kneel it 3 times, and go home. It'll save me a lot of stress.
What do you think it would take to get sort of those types of statistics out of the discourse?
I don't know. Whatever it's going to take to get the 4th down stuff more into the discourse, right? I think it's hard to break old habits, right? Especially when people are really used to talking about a thing a certain way. So I think it's just the more we can kind of bring up counterpoints and hopefully get that conversation shifted. I don't know. If I could answer that, I could probably answer how we change the discourse on a lot more important things than football stats, right?
That's a good point. Let's take a break and take some questions from listeners.
Question. Lenny, for your thoughts.
This is a good one for you, Corey. Superstar Swap asks, why do you always, he's speaking to me, he or she is speaking to me, why do you always say don't draft for need? So that's something I say sometimes talking about the draft and free agency and when I'm happy with how teams approach either. I tend to often say, you want to be in a position where you're not drafting for need. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, we just got through talking about how you shouldn't say always and never, right? No, you're out there always saying don't draft for need. No, I think that's one of those things where like needs change fast, right? Like needs today could be a lot different than needs in a couple weeks. Needs today change.
Yeah.
And sometimes, it just works out that what you need is there for your pick and, it just works out great.
That's good relationship advice too, I think. Yeah.
I don't think you want to take that from me.
The Jester 303 asks, if 2020 is canceled, how should the 2021 draft order be decided? I'm guessing this is above your pay grade, Corey, but guide.
No,
give us a suggestion. It can be, you don't have to be serious.
Yeah, no, I think we should have all the analytics people around the league do all the combine drills and then like award picks based on the performance, right? Like
who will win?
I don't know who, but I actually think y'all would be surprised because I've met a bunch of them, like the men and the women. There's some athletes in that group. Like I'm pretty sure some of them could pump out 225 a few times.
I just kind of want to deviate here, but where do most of the people who work in analytics departments on teams around the NFL come from? Because you told us your background, which isn't that surprising. Like the way you described it from start to finish, I'd be like, yeah, if I had to like backfill, like guess where someone in your position, like what you did, it would probably adhere pretty closely to the path you described. But what do other people do?
It's so different now compared to what it was 6 years ago, right? Like I think now you're seeing people get hired off of who've put out a lot of work on Twitter. A lot of people are coming from the conferences and getting hired. The Big Data Bowl has been really big with that, I think. So there's a lot more paths now than I think there were back then.
But like people are truly getting hired off of Twitter, something that, I mean, you mentioned you guys put out a listing, but that's something you feel is happening more often.
Well, I mean, I don't know if they're necessarily getting hired off Twitter because of it, but I think that people who get their work out there and have it seen have a better chance of getting hired than, people who just aren't really out there. Again, I can really speak to us, like when we hired, but I had some people I definitely knew I wanted to talk to because of the work I'd seen out there.
Interesting. And does it tend to be people with backgrounds like yourselves in terms of, information science, or are you seeing people who have studied something altogether but are just hobbyists in the field?
It depends on the team, right? Like like where the team is in their life cycle of analytics. I think if some teams that have bigger staffs start looking for more specific skills, some teams with the smaller staffs want more like generalists who can do a lot of different stuff.
I'd say the NFL more than other sports, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, when you look at the background of someone on a team in analytics, it's very frequent. It's very common that they worked in another sport, whether you had hockey or baseball or basketball. More than I think other sports like analytics people in Major League Baseball, you'll see more often, I think, that they've been baseball from start to finish. Do you think that's true? And why do you think that is?
I don't really know about other sports, so I can't speak to that, but we definitely started later than the other ones, right? So that probably factors in. And then
you mentioned that, like, if you have that kind of background in baseball, it's perhaps something that you can bring to football. Like, how would that even, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, they've had tracking data for a long time, right? So, I think MLB Network puts out this video about like center fielder route efficiency, right? Like it's just ways they think about positions there. Or even in hockey, like, power plays and penalty kills. Like, are they kind of like red zones, preventing the other, like it's just like, that's design thinking at its core, right? Thinking about things a little differently than normal. So if you have this other sport where the goal is the same, to try to help, find players and help us win and make better decisions, like, can only be helpful to think about things slightly differently.
The Dynamite Kids asks, who are the top 5 villains from X-Men, the animated series? I believe you've never seen X-Men, the animated series.
I might have watched it when I was a kid, but I don't think I can answer this. So it is rare for me to be the less nerdy person in a conversation. So I feel like I should just sit back and savor this moment a little bit and let you go at it.
We are shattering stereotypes here. The analytics person guy came on. He's like, I don't know, nerd. Okay. So I'll just answer this question. Number 1 is Apocalypse, no question. So then you're looking at, Magneto's complicated because he's like there's a mixed legacy there. I would say in the mix for the other top 4, Magneto, Sabretooth, Juggernaut, maybe Jean Grey as Dark Phoenix, which is an epic few episodes. Mystique could also be there. Mr. Sinister. I'll go Apocalypse 1, Juggernaut 2, Magneto 3, Sabretooth 4, Jean Grey is 5. All right. This is another question you can't answer. If Brady is hurt with the Bucks, this is after the Jameis signing, would they really roll with Blaine Gabbert, Ryan Griffin? I didn't know Ryan Griffin was on their team. Dude, Gabbert's not that bad as far as backups go. You know what? Let me ask you a question when it comes to backups around the NFL. And I think you can speak about this generally. Do you find that generally teams want backups who have similar skill sets to their starting quarterbacks? Obviously, you guys had RG3 last year. Do you feel like most teams tend to embrace the backup being similar to the starter?
I think it's mixed. I think that's one of those questions that might always be tough to get an answer for. Like, do you want one who's the same so that if your quarterback goes down, you kind of don't miss a beat? Or do you want one who's completely opposite so that all the defense's prep from the week before is kind of thrown out? Like, I think it's a really interesting question and kind of a philosophy to kind of think about back and forth, but I don't know if we'll ever, that's also really hard to question to answer probably. So it's tough to say.
I hadn't thought about the opposite thing because I think of like, okay, you want the best available guy, right? Like if Cam Newton's there, I don't care if your starter is, a statue or whatever, you take Cam Newton, whatever. But the idea, I guess I hadn't thought of the notion of like having a backup who other teams haven't prepared for. That, I don't know why that never even occurred to me, but that makes a ton of sense. This question is one that I think is really good for you, and I chose it for that reason, and might have like a longer response about it. Mitch Exotic wants to know, what is a quick thing I can say to tell people why momentum doesn't exist?
I get that there is a psychological effect that we as human beings feel when things are going well. It feels like they're going to keep going well. When things are going poorly, like they're going to keep going poorly. So I get that's there, but I've still never seen anyone prove that it exists in the context of altering what's going to happen, like in games. I think there have been a bunch of papers written about it, but like you'll see one paper about the hot hand and then another one will come out refuting it, saying those assumptions were wrong. It kind of goes like back and forth. So, I mean, kind of an alert right here. We're going to have an analytics guy go a little anecdotal for the moment. But like we had a game early in this season, right? We were trailing the whole game. And then in the fourth quarter, we were down 14 and we scored a touchdown and we got a 2-point conversion, right? So we were finally back in it. We're down 6. The building started getting loud again. And then we kicked off and we pinned them back deep, right? I think it was inside the 20. So the entire like feel of the game had changed and the building was rocking. Our stadium gets really, really loud. We have awesome fans. So it was like, it was going on. So we pinned them back, 1st and 10. It was a false start. So I mean, like now even more, right? Now you're just throwing gas on the fire. The stadium is rocking. We're back in this game. We're down 6. We just got a false start. Like, here we go. By every traditional measure of momentum, like we had it all right there. You know what happened on the next play?
Something bad.
We gave up an 88-yard touchdown run. So like what good did like really having all that momentum do us, right?
Yeah.
And so like, I mean, I'm being a little silly, like getting that specific, but like we can kind of throw those examples back and forth at each other like all day in favor of it or against it. But I think really kind of the ultimate thing I would say is like, what is it? Like, does it matter? Because like if we had some definitive study that said momentum exists and I had the momentum meter in my hand in a game, right? And we're in the third quarter and it says the other team has the momentum. Like what, we're going to quit? Like, no, we're going to keep playing and you're going to try to get it back. But I would guess that to try to get it back, you're just going to try to execute and make a play. But aren't we just trying to do that every play anyway? Like it's, it's a little silly, like to me, like what is it? Does it matter if it exists, if it's not going to fundamentally alter your behavior?
Last thing I want to talk to you about before getting to some questions for you is kind of what we can't yet quantify, right? Like so much of the value of player tracking data is that it's gotten us closer to actually being able to quantify the things that are happening on the field, because so much of the problems with statistics in football in the past have been that they're not actually representative of what's happening. Like so many quarterback stats are dumb for that reason, because they're, that we used in the past, like passer rating does not properly encompass the things that happen on a football field. And player tracking gets us a little bit closer to that. But I was kind of wondering, like, what are the things that you still want to see or need to see, or that we're still trying to quantify in your mind?
I mean, ultimately, it always comes back to even with tracking and all that, like we still aren't going to actually know what everybody's specific assignment was on a given play.
Yes.
Right. So we can get closer. But even on that, right? Like even if we know where guys are standing, I don't know what they're doing with their hands. I don't know how they're bending. I don't know which way they're leaning. So it definitely helps and it's getting us closer. But there's definitely still a lot that we're, going to be behind the curve on. I know Brian Burke's done a lot of really cool, interesting stuff with quarterback stuff and O-line. Again, a lot of people doing really in the big data bowl, some cool stuff, but in the end, we're still kind of guessing at what a player was supposed to do. So,
is there any position that you feel like is uniquely difficult to quantify?
I think it probably is O-line, right? Like that's probably the one I think that gets. It was the toughest before tracking, and I think it's still probably the toughest now. If we're talking analytically.
Yeah, no, I am. Can you explain why that is? I think I agree with you. I find, well, anyways, yes. Can you explain? And that's something that we've tried we're trying to kind of get better at quantifying, right, at ESPN, but why is it so hard?
I mean, just how they're all working together to do certain things, and how in the end it's just you're ultimately trying to get your guy blocked, right? So, or I don't know. I think it's just because it's so hard to figure out the actual goal and how they were supposed to work together. That's really a unit working together to do something, and it's really hard to separate out and parcel out who's responsible for what and who should get credit for what.
What about in terms of quarterback play? That's another thing where, I think the statistics are getting a lot better. And I think player tracking has really helped, right? Because we're able to see, okay, where was he trying to go? How open was the guy? What was, we use like completion percentage over expected now. What was the likelihood of that happening? What was schemed up? But what's still missing from that picture in your mind?
Even if, we can just look at different things and like who was more open, who was less open. Like if the guy who was more open was the third read or whatever, like, does it, again, I think it just ultimately comes back to, we don't know what they were supposed to be doing. So it's, hard to know if it was the right decision or not. It's just, you're trying to measure like processing and people processing things, right? We can try to do our best, but there's always going to be something that, and again, this isn't me being fatalistic, right? Like it's worth continuing to explore and try to figure it out. But I just think there's a lot there that's tough to parcel out.
Do you think that, like, what I was saying is true though? Like, do you think that the statistics are getting better that we're using to capture?
Oh yeah. They're definitely getting better for sure. They've advanced a long way. I think even the NFL NGS is putting out completion probability now based on different factors. So, I think we've come a long way in getting better, but I don't think we're perfect, but I don't think perfect's really the goal, right? Don't let perfect get in the way of good.
Well, along those lines, what advice would you give to someone who wants to do your job in the future, other than, being on Twitter and expressing your opinions?
Well, the other thing about Twitter is you got to be careful, right? Because it's going to live there forever. So, but yeah, I think it's getting your work out there is good. Ultimately, communication and listening are the key things. Like, you got to know how to talk to people. You got to know how to relate to people. You got to know how to make your things simple to understand. Be humble, be fun to talk to. Learn to code is big. We're just kind of beyond the point where you can do things in Excel and other things like that. And this one is probably like, I hate when I tell people this, but it's true, is like, you have to get lucky. It's a really competitive field, and there's a lot of people that want to do it. And, I pinch myself every day that I'm fortunate enough to have gotten this opportunity, especially with this organization. It's kind of like that thing, right? You have to put yourself in position to get lucky, but ultimately little luck, I think, is going to go a long way in the end.
That is surprising advice from someone who is numerate. Be lucky. All right, let's wrap as always with a few questions from me and one from Letty.
And now it's time for Dinks and Dunks. I'm getting paid for this, right?
First question, Corey. This uses some feedback I got from an outside source. Is it true that Steve Smith Sr. was a big fan of your hair?
Yes. Yeah. He made multiple comments about my hair, and how it was looking. There was actually one day where I got up late and was rushing in to get to the office. So I was kind of disheveled, and my hair was really long at the time. So it looked bad. And he was the first person I saw, and he was like, boy, he said, you must have had a rough night. And I was like, no, I just woke up late. Like, I'm totally fine. But it was, yeah, he always had something about my hair. He was always very complimentary. I love Steve.
I'm shocked to hear that Steve Smith Sr. had comments. It's a shocking development. Question 2, I know that you are a fan of The Bachelor. How do you feel about the breaking news that Peter is dating Kelly?
I was a Kelly fan during the season.
Yeah, but he got rid of her with like 5 people left.
He did. I know. Look, people make mistakes. Look, it's very, very strange how it's all ultimately ended up. I was such like, what was her line in the car when she was like, I'm an attorney. That line just like, I was just totally on Team Kelly after that. And so,
you feel like Peter's good enough for her? I feel like Peter's not good enough for her.
I mean, I don't know. I also have seen a lot of Bachelor Nation people dating football players recently. So, like, if any of them are interested in football analysts, like, I'm still single. So,
right. Hannah Ann was tied to Josh Dobbs, then Mason Rudolph. So Duck Hodges cannot be far behind. She is like the Steelers' depth chart is right there for her. I think didn't they draft a guy too this year? The Steelers. I feel like they took a quarterback at some point. Yes, there are a lot of NFL players in Bachelor Nation. You're correct. Do you know Mike Renner? He was on Bachelor from PFF.
Yeah, PFF Mike. Yeah, he was on it. Yeah.
So there's room for non-players as well. Okay, you mentioned you watch 90 Day Fiancé. Can you give us a television recommendation that's not The Bachelor or 90 Day Fiancé? This is what everybody wants during quarantine is TV recs.
I know a movie I watched recently that was really fantastic was The Gentleman.
What is that?
Matthew McConaughey and Hugh Grant.
Like a ton of famous people. Yeah, that's like one of those where you see the ad and you're like, wow, this is like 20 famous British people, but I cannot tell what it's about based on the ad.
Yeah. That I watched that recently. I really, really enjoyed it. So I'd say that. TV show wise, I mean, the classics, right? Like Top Chef.
Oh,
I mean, the current season right now is really good.
It's so good. Who do you want? I mean, if it's not Gregory or Melissa, I riot. Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Gregory. If I had to pick one, he's probably one I'm rooting for most.
Because he was like robbed too, I feel like, his season. There's a great, for those Top Chef fans who are listening, Kevin Arnovitz, who I work with, has a Top Chef podcast called Pack Your Knives with Tom Haberstraw. You should check out.
Okay.
Question 4. According to your Twitter bio, you are a fan of Taylor Swift. Why has it been so long since she's had a good song?
I wrote that line in my bio when Shake It Off was big, and
it's kind of outdated now.
It's really outdated, but I think I've tweeted 4 times ever, so it's kind of why it hasn't changed. I don't know, right? She did that Netflix thing recently. I still haven't watched. Like, it's hard to say. I don't know. Maybe Shake It Off was just so good.
Yeah.
What was the one that came out? Like, Look What You Made Me Do.
That was okay.
I felt like that one was very divisive.
That was years ago. That was so long ago. That was
see, that's what I mean. That's like the last one that I remember being actually like released. So I've kind of fallen out of the game on that.
Last question, as always, is from Lenny. I didn't write it. Sorry. He bet all of his savings on you guys beating the Titans, and he wants to know if you'll pay him back. And also, why did analytics die that day?
Do I get to pay him back like in treats?